I've frequently been asked, what is sadhana? From the strictest classical Vedantic and yogic perspective, sadhana is not merely a spiritual practice. This modern translation is too weak, it's too vague. Sadhana is the total, deliberate restructuring of one's entire life so that ignorance, known as avidya, is destroyed and the truth alone remains. I made a video on avidya, so feel free to check that out on my YouTube channel. Different traditions express it differently, but I'm going to focus on the most orthodox streams, particularly Adi Shankaracharya's Viveka Chudamani, the Bhagavad Gita, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Upanishads, and the traditional guru-disciple lineage. This gives a really rigorous understanding. So first, let's break down the literal meaning of the word. The Sanskrit root is sad, meaning to accomplish, to bring to completion, to perfect, or to attain directly. A sadhaka is someone whose entire existence is directed toward that accomplishment. The accomplishment is not becoming spiritual. It is not becoming peaceful or happy or morally superior. It is moksha, complete freedom from ignorance and from the cycles of life and death. It is all about removing the ignorance of reality. This is when one mistakes oneself for the body, the personality, the thoughts, the emotions, the memories, the possessions, or their achievements. It is this that inevitably leads to suffering. This mistake is called adhyasa, meaning superimposition. One superimposes the I on something that is not the self. Sadhana exists solely to remove this mistake. Sadhana is every conscious movement that weakens ignorance and strengthens knowledge of the self. Everything else, even meditation, is secondary. So that means if meditation strengthens the ego, it's not sadhana. But if serving others destroys the ego, that is sadhana. If silence breeds pride, that's not sadhana. And if difficult work destroys selfishness, that is sadhana. The outer action matters less than what happens to the ego. So let's look at this from the position of Advaita Vedanta. Classical Advaita Vedanta is extraordinarily strict. It says that liberation comes only from knowledge. Not rituals, not meditation alone, not charity, not yoga postures, not mystical experiences, knowledge. But knowledge requires preparation, and that preparation is called sadhana. So let's look at the qualifications known as Sadhana Chatustaya, which are the fourfold set of mental and moral qualifications that are needed for spiritual liberation, especially in Advaita Vedanta. These traits ready the mind for deep self-inquiry and meditation. Without it, scripture says that realization is nearly impossible. First, we have the quality of viveka, which is discrimination, constant discernment between the eternal self and the temporary, kind of like sorting real gold from fake gold. So I advise you always ask continuously, what changes? What never changes? The body changes, the mind changes, thoughts change, but awareness does not. This discrimination becomes continuous. It becomes constant. The second qualification of Sadhana Chatustaya is vairagya, which is dispassion. And ironically, this is the one that I'm most passionate about. Not passionate, but interested in. It is the quality of dispassion, so not hatred and not repression, but rather seeing clearly that nothing finite can give infinite fulfillment, because pleasure comes, pleasure goes, success comes and goes, youth goes, relationships change. The wise stop expecting permanent pleasure from impermanent things. The third qualification of Sadhana Chatustaya is the sixfold inner wealth known as Samadhi, Shatka, Sampatti. These are 6 disciplines known as Sama, Dhamma, Uparati, Titiksha, Shraddha, and Samadhana. Sama is the mastery of the mind, not suppression but steadiness. And Dhamma is mastery of the senses. This means the senses stop dragging consciousness outward. Uparati is withdrawal, a natural loss of fascination with distraction. This also means less of your prana is scattered. It is focused inward. Titiksha, meaning endurance, where even in the presence of hot and cold, pleasure or pain, praise or blame, one remains inwardly unmoved. And Shraddha, meaning a deep trust, not blind belief, but faith and confidence in the Guru and your spiritual path and teachings. And Samadhana, meaning one-pointedness. The mind remains fixed on the goal. The fourth qualification of sadhana chatustaya is mumukshutva. I find this the most beautiful. This is the quality of having a burning desire for liberation. This is considered indispensable, not casual interest or hobby spirituality, but a longing so intense that liberation becomes life's highest priority. Now, let's talk about the classical yogic understanding of sadhana, especially as taught in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. The aim of sadhana is cessation of mental modifications. When the mind becomes perfectly still, pure awareness shines unobstructed. Therefore, sadhana becomes systemic purification. Imagine your mind like a lake. When the lake is full of waves, you can't see the bottom. When the lake becomes perfectly still, you can see straight to the bottom. According to yoga, your true nature has never disappeared. It is simply obscured because the lake of the mind is constantly disturbed by thoughts, desires, fears, memories, habits, and sensory stimulation. Sadhana is everything that gradually stills the lake. It means reaching a state where the mind no longer compulsively reacts to everything. So let's talk about the 8 limbs described in this. These are not 8 optional practices. They are one integrated discipline. So normally insult leads to anger, and anger leads to thoughts, and thoughts lead to revenge, and revenge leads to anxiety, and anxiety leads to more thoughts. So the mind immediately creates wave after wave. A yogini is training so that eventually an insult leads not to a single disturbance of the mind. The mind remains completely clear, not because they're suppressing emotion, but because nothing was stirred in the first place. So the 8 limbs are like building a temple. Think of constructing a temple. You're not going to start with the roof. You begin with the foundation. So every limb prepares for the next. So the first limb is yama, ethical restraint. For example, the practice of ahimsa, known as non-violence, truthfulness, non-stealing, non-greed, celibate moderation or conservation of vital energy. Without these, higher yoga is considered impossible. Learning this was fascinating, as I now understand why our prana vidya training to become healers, we have specific methods and practices that help us imbibe the virtues such as loving kindness and non-injury, generosity and non-stealing, honesty and non-lying, constancy of aim and effort, and non-laziness, and moderation and non-excessiveness. Because without these, higher yoga is considered extremely difficult or somewhat impossible. So yama is essentially, to stop feeding the causes of agitation. And the second limb of yoga from the Yoga Sutras is niyama, meaning inner discipline, purity, contentment, self-study, and surrender to God. And when I say purity, I mean not just physical cleanliness. It also means reducing what pollutes the mind. So I would advise you constantly ask yourself, what do I watch? What do I read? What conversations do I dwell on? And what am I consuming every day? Everything leaves an impression. Third limb of yoga from the Yoga Sutras is asana. And asana is a stable meditation posture. This is a posture that manipulates your energies in a certain way to help you with the purification and attaining cessation of the mind's modifications. It's not gymnastics. The fourth limb of yoga from the Yoga Sutras is pranayama, which is regulation of life force energy of prana through breath, not simply breathing exercises. The fifth limb of yoga from the Yoga Sutras is pratyahara, the withdrawal of senses. The senses cease enslaving attention. This is the turning inward of your senses to block out distractions. The sixth limb of yoga from the Yoga Sutras is dharana, which is concentration, so holding awareness steadily in one direction. The seventh limb of yoga from the Yoga Sutras is dhyana, which is meditation, continuous flow of attention in a certain direction. So instead of repeatedly pulling the mind back, attention flows continuously towards its object. This is an advanced stage. So the eighth and final limb of yoga from the Yoga Sutras is samadhi, or absorption, where subject-object separation dissolves. In the yogic tradition, samadhi is the final limb of Ashtanga yoga. It is a profound state of total meditative absorption where the knower, the known, and the act of knowing becomes one. The mind and the ego completely dissolves, allowing the yogini to experience pure, limitless consciousness and unity with the universe. So let's talk about the role of tapas in sadhana. Tapas means inner fire or fiery discipline. It is the dedicated effort and passion you use to push past your limits. It's not about self-harm or punishment, but instead it is the brave, loving choice to show up for your goal to moksha, even when you want to quit. It's meaningful, conscious discipline aligned with liberation. The word itself comes from the Sanskrit root tap, which means to burn or to heat. In yoga, this heat is not external. It happens inside your body and mind. Yoginis use this fire to burn away impurities. It burns out bad habits, deep fears, and negative thoughts. It's also used to build willpower. It gives you the strength to choose long-term peace over short-term pleasure. And to create transformation. It changes you so that you can reach your highest spiritual potential. Tapas is one of those forces that makes sadhana possible. One of the most important things to understand when understanding sadhana is to understand the role of a guru. Vedanta is unequivocal. So scripture says that without a competent guru, subtle ignorance is extraordinarily difficult to remove because the ego cannot easily detect its own illusions. The guru is not worshipped as a personality. The guru functions as the remover of ignorance through teaching, guidance, and grace. The guru is the bridge between the finite and the infinite. It's the guru's grace which is bestowed upon you during both transmission and initiation of the sadhana, and the sheer presence of the guru that allows one to attain a higher state and dissolve the illusion. This transmission is in the form of Shaktipata, which is descent of spiritual power, Diksha, which is initiation, and Anugraha, which is grace. This is why I describe true sadhana to only come from the guru to the disciple through initiation, which is why lineages are so highly respected. The guru transmits being. It is transformation of consciousness. The guru is not simply someone who knows more than you. The guru is someone who is established in a different mode of being. By living, serving, practicing, and opening oneself to such a teacher, the disciple is gradually transformed, and the guru helps dissolve the ego, which ignites the sadhana. For an advanced yogini, daily life becomes sadhana. So one misconception is that sadhana only happens during the practice itself, but traditionally, everything becomes sadhana. Eating, speaking, working, sleeping, relationships, conflict, money. Every moment reveals attachment, and every attachment becomes material for practice. Karma yoga is perhaps the most practical expression of this. If one performs action without attachment to results, this doesn't mean laziness or passivity, but rather complete effort without any psychological dependence on success or results. This is where action becomes purification. Now, in bhakti, sadhana is in devotional traditions where every action becomes an offering with the understanding that I am not the doer and this belongs to the divine. And as a result, gradually the ego softens. In Jnana Yoga, sadhana is where inquiry becomes continuous. So who is angry? Who is afraid? Who is thinking? Who am I? Not intellectually asking, but existentially. This is repeated until identification shifts from mind to awareness. Now, please note that sadhana can also become a hurdle towards spiritual progress because the ego subtly appropriates spirituality. The mind will say, I meditate, I am advanced, I have achieved samadhi, I am awakened. Traditional teachers repeatedly warn that spiritual pride may become an even greater obstacle than ordinary worldly desire. So genuine sadhana includes vigilance against the ego, claiming ownership of the spiritual progress. So the strict traditions generally place less emphasis on extraordinary experiences and more on stable transformation. Common signs of spiritual progress include less compulsive desire, less fear, greater equanimity in pleasure and pain, increased truthfulness, reduced ego-centeredness, natural compassion without self-display, greater steadiness of attention, spontaneous contentment, deeper discrimination between the transient and the eternal, and a persistent longing for truth over worldly gain. So visions, bliss, unusual energies, or psychic experiences may occur, but they're regarded as incidental and can even become a distraction if one becomes attached to them. They can drag you in even deeper to Maya. I don't know if the mic is picking up the rumbling in my stomach. I'm very hungry. To summarize, sadhana is the following. It's the deliberate path undertaken for the realization of truth or liberation. Sadhana is the total process of transforming oneself from ignorance, known as avidya, to direct knowledge or realization, known as moksha. For traditional lineages, sadhana is a living relationship with a guru through which instruction, correction, initiation, and grace become part of the transformative process. Sadhana is a way of life, not a collection of practices. Sadhana is the conscious use of every aspect of life as a means for awakening. Sadhana is the disciplined application of yogic teachings, either from scripture or traditionally from a realized guru. Sadhana is the purification of the body, mind, senses, intellect, ego, so they no longer obscure reality. Sadhana is the gradual dissolution of conditioned patterns, known as samskaras, and egoic identification. Sadhana is the cultivation of the qualities necessary for realization, such as steadiness, discrimination, dispassion, humility, devotion, and one-pointedness. Sadhana is the consistent practice of methods appropriate to one's path, such as meditation, self-inquiry, mantra, devotion, selfless service, asanas, pranayama, ethical living, and scriptural study. I want to note here that the key part of that sentence is that is appropriate to one's path. And what's appropriate to one's path is determined by their temperament. So for some people, their sadhana may include mantra chanting, and that works for their temperament. For some people, it has to be an active physical practice like hatha yoga. For some people, it has to be a very ascetic practice like sitting somewhere for long periods of time and just being still, or removing oneself completely from, normal society. Sadhana is remaining faithful to the path despite resistance, which is where tapas operates. Sadhana is living in accordance with Dharma so that one's life supports rather than obstructs realization. Hence why I do what I do. Sadhana is ultimately the removal of ignorance rather than the acquisition of something new, because the true self is held to be already complete. Sadhana does not create the self. The self is never absent. It removes ignorance, just as cleaning a mirror does not create the face reflected in it. The individual does not become Brahman. Rather, the mistaken identification with the limited individual falls away, and what has always been true is recognized, which is why it is called a realization. In that sense, the strictest Vedantic teachers often say that the highest sadhana culminates in the recognition that there never was a separate self to perfect, only ignorance to remove. Practice is therefore indispensable until that recognition is firm, after which even the sense of I am practicing naturally dissolves. This is why the path is sometimes described as using a thorn to remove another thorn and then discarding both. This video was inspired by one of my good friends who asked this very important question of what is sadhana, because I use this terminology quite frequently, and I really hope that you enjoyed the breakdown and took something new from it. And thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a beautiful day. And for those who do have a practice, I hope this inspires you to go out there and do your sadhana. And I wish you all the best on your journey to mukti.